How do you think the skills that you possess have helped to make you a successful partner?
I guess it's about looking at the journey, isn't it? Because looking back on my career, I think the first thing that you really need.
Today's guest is Simon Bushell. He is the founding partner at Seladore Legal, a leading conflict-free litigation boutique. Previously a partner at Herbert Smith and London chair of Latham & Watkins litigation department, he is ranked in the Legal 500 Hall of Fame and recognized as a leading lawyer in banking and commercial litigation.
You've got to figure out very quickly, what is the DNA of that firm and how are you going to be best able to survive and succeed and flourish in that firm. Build a team of really brilliant people and surround yourself with them. That is by far and away the single most important thing that I've achieved here, is build a team of really brilliant people. You cannot underestimate the importance of the brand that you've joined or that you're in. And that was definitely a hurdle that I faced at Latham. The fact that I was no longer a partner at Herbert Smith, but was a partner at Latham and Watkins, who didn't have a particularly significant reputation for commercial litigation, was definitely an obstacle.
Are there types of people that you've seen who have been successful in their previous firms and then haven't been able to replicate that success where they've moved to? And why does that happen, do you think?
That's a good question. I think it's very important in that sort of situation.
Welcome to Beyond Billables, lessons from top law firm partners, the podcast where renowned and well-known law firm partners reveal the secrets of their success. I'm Stephen Rodney, formerly co-founder of Fox Rodney Search, previously one of the best-known boutique legal headhunting firms of the last 25 years, and now founder of Integrate Coaching, where we produce tailor-made lateral integration programs for partners joining new firms. Today, it's an absolute pleasure to be joined by Simon Bushell, founder and senior partner of Seladore Legal, one of the elite conflict-free litigation boutiques, which acts on many of the largest and most complicated cross-border disputes. Simon originally started his career at Herbert Smith, where he was a partner for over 16 years, including as head of fraud and asset tracing, before moving to Latham & Watkins, where he was the London chair of the firm's litigation and trial department. In 2020, Simon founded Seladore Legal, which has now grown to over 20 lawyers in the UK, Milan, and most recently, Singapore. Simon is listed in the Legal 500 Hall of Fame for civil fraud and variously ranked for multiple years a leading lawyer for banking and commercial litigation. Celador is described in the Legal 500 as an astounding unit of top litigators. So welcome, Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. So if we can dive straight in, Simon, what is being a successful partner from your point of view, apart from billing a lot?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Stephen. And it's a privilege to kick off your program here. Obviously, success is a relative concept. And I assume that for the purposes of this discussion, we're confining ourselves to broadly commercial law firms, international law firms, and the like. I think success probably, if we're trying to define it, is something along, the following lines: someone who makes a mark, someone who builds a reputation, and someone who improves and develops the reputation of the firm that he or she is a partner in.
Okay. And how do you think the skills that you possess have helped to make you a successful partner? And what are you've named 2 or 3 things there, but are those the top 3 or 4 attributes for being successful, or there are others that actually are the key to success?
I guess it's about looking at the journey, isn't it? Because first of all, you're on the journey to become a partner. Once you arrive at that point, you're then on a further journey, which is how to remain a partner and become a successful partner. You talk about skills. I think the first thing that you really need, I wouldn't say is a skill, it's an inherent drive.
Okay.
It's an ambition and a drive. And I looking back on my career, which I've obviously done in preparation for this conversation, I pretty much determined that drive was the start of this whole journey.
Okay. So do you think, looking at drive, is that something that just is innate, or you can learn to have the kind of drive you need?
I think I'm sure you can learn drive in a sense, but I think it's innate. I think it comes from your background, from who you are, from how you grew up, all the influences that you had. as a young person. And I think I was very hungry for independence. I really enjoyed the transition from, being a young boy at home to going to university and having independence. And I wanted that to continue. My father was a lawyer, which in some ways helped. It gave me exposure. He was not a commercial lawyer. He worked in the criminal field. He was a prosecutor. He was a smart man. But I could see that once I became exposed to commercial law and I got started into my career, I could see that the journey as a commercial lawyer was going to be something very different from the journey that he'd had. When I was young, one of the things that he did which influenced me was he occasionally used to take me to prisons and to youth detention centers and things like this. I remember thinking, Christ, I don't want to be in one of these ever in my life. So I guess it was a very subtle way of steering me clear of trouble and making sure that I focused on what I was trying to do in my life.
So it wasn't necessarily to help you be a successful person, just to make sure you didn't end up in one of those institutions.
Yeah, well, as I say, my dad came from a school of subtlety, so one way or another, it stuck with me, and it certainly got me, steered me away from trouble. Anyway, let's put it like that.
Yeah. Okay, Simon. So looking more at your own career, what was it that kind of got you to be a partner at Herbert Smith? And then looking ahead from that point, how did you become a successful partner once you become a partner?
Okay, great questions. So I signaled the fact that I was a fairly driven individual. So I kind of wanted to be a partner because that was the reason that I felt that I was at Herbert Smith in the first place. There was a career path. It was a little blurred, to put it mildly, but there were young partners, and there came a time, or there would come a time when you would be hopefully considered for promotion. And I think, back in the day, so I became a partner in 1997, so 10 years after I joined as an article clerk. It was really like being admitted to membership of a club, of an exclusive. That's what it felt like. And you felt like if you obtained membership to that club, you were set up for life, unless you somehow messed it up. And so I worked incredibly hard. It really was a sort of an exercise in stamina. I built a reputation for fraud litigation, and I worked on a number of cases with a number of great partners, and made a difference, I suppose, in a couple of those cases where, for example, on one case, I went off to the Cayman Islands and I obtained the first ever Norwich Pharmacal order in the Cayman Islands, together with local counsel there, where we did the hearing together. And so those sorts of things, I was interested and really stimulated. And I think that kind of got me sort of over the line. And when I became a partner, I realized, not immediately, but I realized quite quickly that you're actually just at the beginning of another journey. And so you've got to, get your way up that ladder. So at the time at Herbert Smith, the only way you could be progressing was that you became a fixed salaried partner initially, and then you became an equity partner, or not, as the case may be. And so the next part of the journey was to become an equity partner, and so on. And I think at this time, looking back, I traveled a hell of a lot. I worked really, really hard on building relationships. And, when I traveled, I made sure that I made relationships with people, that I worked out what was going on in their local markets. I did a lot of traveling around the former Soviet Union, and as everybody knows, built up a reputation for doing Russian-related work. I could see was going to be huge. They didn't trust their own legal systems, so they needed to find a legal system they did trust, and English law and the English judiciary and so on was the answer for them. So I was in the right place. I was in the right place at the right time. I think at that point, then it became clear to me, well, you've got to, and then of course it's not just about the individual, right? So what I was very fortunate to have was a group of great partners at Herbert Smith that could collaborate with. I very quickly became a partner that relished working with other partners, helping other partners' clients, helping them find creative solutions and picking up, difficult situations and making them successful. And I continued to do that right through to the time that I was headhunted by Latham and Watkins.
You mentioned previously about when you joined Herbert Smith that I think that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said was the effect of that the intellectual prowess was sometimes seen as kind of above the needs of the client. Did that change as your career at Herbert Smith went on?
Yes, absolutely, it did. However, I don't want to get into a critique of Herbert Smith, but I think I think there's a definite tendency for UK law firms to be more inward looking than US law firms. US law firms, as I said earlier, are very client focused, and I think the UK firms have been slower to recognize the need to do that. I'd like to think that I was reasonably astute in that regard and wanted to make sure that the firm focused on clients more than anything else.
Okay. And if you were coming up now, as a senior associate, is the blueprint for success today the same as it was then?
That's another great question. So I suspect that you should do one of these interviews with somebody in that position and try to work out what it is they want. Because sometimes, I do wonder whether lawyers in that sort of aspirational situation say that I might have been when I was sort of 30, 31 or so, whether they want the same thing and whether they want it as quickly as I probably wanted it. I wonder whether there are more people out there who are sort of, where, husband and wife are both earning, reasonably good money, and neither one of them needs to, sort of go the extra mile to climb to the top of the mountain. They're both, 3/4 of the way up the mountain, and that's more than enough, for the two of them to sort of manage, the things that they want and get out of life. I think that COVID, the pandemic has really changed the way everybody works. So I think, people have got to work out, whether or not they're willing to go and travel and resume that sort of thing, once more to the degree that we did back in my day, where I was, jetting around a hell of a lot. And so, you're building relationships that way. Just come back from Singapore and, reminded myself of how important it is, to meet people in the flesh and to have nice conversations with them and let a conversation flow over a lunch or a coffee or a beer, rather than some scheduled 30-minute focused conversation, which is all very well, but you miss a lot of the nuance. So I don't have a concrete answer to what you've asked me, but I think certainly there's room for partners who are technically excellent but perhaps don't have business development skills or client building skills, but those people will probably never be remunerated as highly as a person with both sets of skills and the willingness to use those skills. You have got to go out of your way. You can't build relationships with clients during the hours of 9 to 5. That's when you're doing the work. So you've got to find time after work to be able to build those relationships. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. There's only so many hours in the day, as they say. So these are real challenges for people, and I massively sympathize, and I really, really do mean this, with people, young lawyers who've started a family and who've got childcare challenges. And I think if I'd had my children, so I've got young children and started late in life, but if I had had my children when I was 33, 34, 35 years old, I would never have seen them growing up. I would never, ever have seen them. I'd never have taken them to school. I'd have never picked them up from school. I can't really think how I would have, built a proper relationship with those children and been successful the way I was at the same time. So I've got enormous sympathy with those things. And I think that may be having a big effect. I think young people, young parents are really enjoying, bringing up their children, and they're really struggling with, the sacrifices that might have to be made to really, really replicate the sort of crazy hard work that needs to be put in to maintain a partnership at some of these major international law firms.
Okay. So, I mean, you've had experience in a large UK-based law firm and in US and boutique law firms. Looking at all those experiences, and maybe they're different depending on which firm you're in, again, apart from how much you bill, are there common attributes, maybe the ones you've talked about already, but maybe different ones, or are there different ones in the different types of firms that you've been in?
I've obviously only been at Herbert Smith and as you mentioned, Latham and Watkins. So they are two fantastic firms to draw comparisons from. So we can dive into that, I suppose. I mean, I think again, looking back, the Herbert Smith way of doing things at the time, certainly when I joined in 1987, was that it was the intellectual purity of the legal work that was being done, which was the thing that was at the top of the list of people's priorities. The clients themselves and the outcome, it's always seemed to me to be not the top of the list, if you like. And so I think I was different with that approach. And I was certainly a very commercially aware person. And I think that became more apparent when I joined Latham and Watkins and when I joined a group of people that were so focused clients and client time. So, you've mentioned twice that you don't want to talk about billables. And I can understand why, given the title of the podcast, but the reality is that it sort of, it does come down to that in the way people approach the work. And at Latham, that there was a real sense that if you were not occupied on clients and client work, but clients, giving them what they want, then you were not going to succeed. And that was a massive difference. The extent of that obsession almost was very remarkable and a real contrast.
So that's something that you noticed very quickly when you joined Latham's, was it?
Yes, it was. And I think, again, I think if I'm not wrong or not mistaken, that you're asking these questions because you're trying to draw out the distinction between, different firms and therefore the way in which partners or aspiring partners are going to achieve success. And you're absolutely right to do that, because no two law firms are the same. They are all different, and the key to success is understanding those differences and understanding, first and foremost, the firm you're in. What is the DNA of that firm, and how are you going to be best able to survive and succeed and flourish in that firm.
Yes. And that actually brings me on to, obviously, the main thing that we do at Integrate is help on integrating partners. So when you moved from Herbert Smith to Latham's, was there any kind of program which helped you understand the difference in law firm culture between Herbert Smith and Latham's, or was it more simply, well, you're an established partner, you should be able to work it out for yourself?
It was without doubt the latter.
Right.
And, you do need to work it out, I mean, without being specific to either Latham or Herbert Smith, I think you've got to figure out very quickly whether or not, you've got to figure out why you've joined a new firm, right? So you're moving and you're joining, why are you doing that? And what do they want from it? What do you want from it? And, it's slightly different for me because the nature of my work, where I'm doing one-off, big, complicated cases that are probably fairly unique. If you're a transactional lawyer, where you've got clients, you've got to work out whether those clients are going to still instruct you at the firm that you've joined, whether that's the object of the exercise, or whether the firm has hired you because they've got a bunch of clients that they fully service in the way that they want to, and you're being brought on to fit into that particular team. And there are certainly circumstances where partners can join a new firm and pretty much abandon their previous client base, and they would waste a lot of time and energy trying to persuade those clients to get to know a whole bunch of new people and cross-selling process and perhaps pay higher hourly rates and so on. So that can result in a lot of wasted energy. And obviously where my firm is concerned, and firms like mine who are effectively serving the conflict market and being independent, it's very important for our lawyers to understand that, whichever clients they may have come across in their past lives, where they've been working at law firms where clients are on a panel and you can expect to receive a phone call from those clients, it's a radically different world when you come to our firm. Even though we're more than capable of doing the same work and would have been able to serve those clients without any difficulty, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to position ourselves so that we can sue anyone. And a client who's used to working with Clifford Chance or Freshfields and so on is going to really sort of take some persuading in the first instance to move away from their traditional firm, unless they have a conflict.
Okay. So actually, just before we move on to the experience at Celador, I mean, you mentioned obviously if you're a transactional lawyer, things that can be different. And I appreciate you're a litigator, but you've seen lots of transactional lawyers and you've seen good ones and less good ones. So are there different attributes if you're a transactional lawyer for success, perhaps, than as a litigator that you've managed to see in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of it is being creative.
Yeah.
Finding solutions for clients that are effective, fast, commercially rewarding, pulling off a big transaction in a way in which meets the deadlines that are often imposed, and threading the needle of the competition issues and so on, those sorts of things. And you've got to have a lot of stamina. I mean, the people do transactional deals, they have just astounding quantities of stamina and the ability to keep concentrated despite the endless hours of meetings and long nights. And of course that all does require teamwork. So I'd say teamwork and the ability to motivate a team is another one of those qualities that you probably don't think about too much, but it needs to be there in abundance.
Okay. And then looking a bit more at the difference between US and UK, I mean, the US law firms, litigators in US law firms, US litigators, they tend, well, the reputation they have is often that they're very close to their clients, and often they are the key person for their clients. And so when they move firms, US law firms in the US, they often do take client relationships, whether those clients are doing corporate or litigation or whatever they're doing. Whereas in the UK, often litigators, and you've kind of touched on this, are more one-off. So do you think in US law firms, the ability to wrap your hands around the clients more is one of the attributes of success?
I think it's certainly a prerequisite in the United States. The thing about the United States is that it is such a different market to the UK market.
Okay.
And you have not so many, but you have very large areas of practice that really do fuel the law firm's diet, if you like. So white collar work is very different from what it is in the UK, and I can explain why if you want me to. Competition litigation is also, or antitrust, is very different in the United States. And shareholder activism is very different in the United States. And also patent litigation is very different in the United States. So all of those, that's 4 massive practice areas that really don't exist in the UK in the same way. And so, once you've, defended somebody in a bank in a white collar scenario and gone through all of that, and the sort of stakes are extremely high, you can certainly expect to build up a client base. And if you've come from the Department of Justice or the state attorney's office and got a reputation there, you can very quickly, turn that into a successful career at a big law firm, which is what many of the US partners do.
So coming on to Celador, when you founded Celador, did you realize quite quickly that there were, again, different attributes needed to be successful in a conflict-free litigation boutique, and compared to a Latham's or Herbert Smith?
I don't think I noticed anything stark in that regard. What I noticed was that I had a reputation and a following that I'd underestimated.
Right.
It's always nice and comforting to be seen in directories and ranked as, a leading individual and so forth. And there's no doubt at all that people in that position have worked very hard to get there. But I think certainly in my case and in my experience, I was really pleasantly surprised by the ease with which I persuaded clients to come with me, and the ease with which new clients came out of the woodwork, and I very quickly understood that other lawyers at other law firms, were very important to the success of the firm.
Right.
So,
Okay.
and that's really one of the keys. It's not the only feature. So the fact that you can concentrate on disputes and the cases, rather than have to worry about managing relationships of a client that other parts of your big firm might be interested in, that all of those things really become very, very secondary, and largely irrelevant. Other law firms are always looking for referral relationships where their clients have conflicts arising, and they are often looking to work with law firms like ours, where we don't have a transactional practice. We're not going to be, competing with the law referring firm, and we come from the sort of background that the clients in question are going to recognize and understand and value. And that, means that our job is to make the referring law firm look good, do as a good a job as we possibly can, and leave the client for the referring law firm to, transact with in the usual way.
Okay. So that is interesting, isn't it? So basically the ability to treat the referring law firm as the initial client, because effectively they are, that's quite different to experience in a large UK or large US law firm. So that involves different skills, I would have thought, when you did.
Well, it requires recognizing that and making sure that you constantly appreciate that law firms that you come across could be potential referrers of work, rather than being seen as competitors.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say on that? Because I think that's quite an interesting, different skill set that a lot of lawyers perhaps wouldn't realize when they joined a conflict-free firm.
Well, I think yes. I mean, I would like to dip into this a little bit more, really, because I think it's one of the things that it's a very important feature of the market. I'm not so sure, how relevant it is to individual people, but certainly an understanding of the market is very important. And I do passionately believe that clients underestimate the extent to which major law firms may have conflicts of interest, however those conflicts might manifest themselves, and however obvious or otherwise they might be. I'm really talking about the more subtle conflicts. And I do also feel that the market needs to more widely recognize the independence of conflict-free law firms, in order to bring a breath of fresh air to a particularly complex situation. And so, we've seen in the sort of white collar investigation space a few examples of situations where law firms and their clients have been criticized because the need for an independent investigation has been overlooked in favor of, well, let's stick with the law firm that we know and trust, and hopefully they'll get to the bottom of it all. And I think some dogged investigative journalists have picked up on that in a few examples, and exposed it, and sort of questioned whether that's the right way to go.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Moving back to you personally, what's the best moment you've had as a partner, and the worst, and why? You can protect the innocent, but
it's a very easy question to answer. So the best moment I had as a partner was at Herbert Smith, where I scored 100 in a 20-over game against PwC. And then the worst moment was the next day, when I was rebuked by the senior partner for not letting the client win and failing my client relationship management skills.
Okay. Fine. So they came together, the best and the worst.
Yes.
No,
I've obviously had some
yeah.
interesting moments, but I don't think now's the time for me to go into those in real detail. The
Okay.
tough moments, You as a litigator, you have to be resilient.
Yes.
And you're always going to have some ups and downs as a litigator, and I don't think this is the right forum for me to be articulating those
Okay.
issues. But thankfully, the good times vastly outweigh the bad times, and certainly these days, well, in fact, most of my career, I've always sort of bounced into work and bounced into the office and felt like every day was a new day and a different day, and I've been incredibly lucky. I can't hardly believe my luck. In fact, it's been an astonishing career, and the fact that I'm still enjoying it, at the age of 61 is a testament to that. And I can't really see, a situation where I'll stop enjoying it.
Okay. And do you, as a litigator, and I appreciate you don't want to go into details, but another litigator I've spoken to in preparation for this series talked about how litigators have to really read the psychology of situations far more than other types of lawyers because of the nature of litigation. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, it is a strategic endeavor. So yeah, you're always trying to look into the mind of your opponent or your opponents, and also trying to work out how to plan a strategy and work out how you will impact your opponent with the things that you do.
Yeah. So that for aspiring lawyers coming up then, who are litigators, how important do you think that skill is compared to sort of technical, just sort of pure technical skills?
It's a good question. I think it's very important. I think those sorts of insights, emotional intelligence and psychology, planning, are all really important skills. Negotiating skills, because you are adopting a position on behalf of your client, so that requires a certain mindset. And if you're negotiating, you need to be putting forward a position that is convincing. And I think it's actually quite difficult for young lawyers to learn the art of negotiation. It's certainly not straightforward.
Did you learn that? And this comes on to our next question, actually, is what mentors have you had in your career and key pieces of advice that you've received either to do or not to do, and whether that skill, the art of negotiation, came through watching those mentors in action?
Yeah. So I can't pinpoint, in all honesty, one particular person who, certainly lawyer, who taught me or contributed to my knowledge of how to negotiate, but I've certainly picked it up from clients. So, working with so many different clients, so many different approaches, and one or two clients who will obviously remain nameless, really have, stood out as being, really brilliant negotiators. It's easy to say, but obviously, if you happen to be in a very weak position, then it's quite difficult to be a brilliant negotiator. But if you've got a good hand, then playing it well is very important. And I've seen a few clients play their hand very well. And I have also been in one or two situations where our hand has been very weak, and we have managed to turn that into a positive. And that's probably one of the most rewarding things that I can think of. I have one case in mind, which I won't name, but we were in a tight spot, and I picked up the phone and dangled a carrot, and I was just utterly amazed that it was taken.
Right.
And then once it had been taken, I was able to sort of leverage it, to an even better position for the client, which was good teamwork, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on the subject of mentors, are there mentors that you had?
Well, so I suppose, yes, I suppose in some ways there were. So when I was a young lawyer at Herbert Smith, I was in a group of partners that were really, they were really, really special people. So one of them was Lawrence Collins, became the first Solicitor High Court judge, then obviously Supreme Court judge. And I remember once when I was a very young lawyer, I sent him a memo. I'd been reading his book. At that stage, he was the general editor of Dicey and Morris, and one of the most, revered lawyers of his generation. And the book on conflicts of laws, is the Bible insofar as private international law is concerned. And I dropped him a note saying that I'd picked up a couple of, fairly insignificant erratum in the book, so that he could correct it in the next edition. He didn't speak to me for about a year after that.
Right.
And then about 30 years later, I asked him to review my book on disclosure of information and Norwich pharmacal jurisdiction, and he very kindly agreed to do so. And he wrote a wonderful review for me, and but he couldn't resist pointing out a couple of errors in there as well, so he returned the favor 30 years later. It was absolutely classic. And of course, I was also exposed at the time to people like David Gold, and David Natali, who's probably less well known, but he was an absolute legend at Herbert Smith and in the city at the time. And of course, Charles Plant, who was the head of the litigation department for many years. So lots and lots of people and contemporaries of mine. I mean, I joined Herbert Smith in what turned out to be a very strong cohort of articled clerks, as we were then. And so Adam Johnson, he was around when I was a young lawyer. He's obviously gone on to become a High Court judge in the Chancery Division. James Palmer was floating around, and he obviously became the senior partner of the firm for many years. Ian Cox, I noticed, has retired recently, and he had a very successful and extremely long career. I think he must have been on every single committee that's ever existed at Herbert Smith, one way or another. But good luck to him, and there were a tremendous number of very, very successful people at that time who all went on to become partners in the firm.
Okay. And any key pieces of advice that any of those people or other people gave you, that you received and which you put into practice and have had, you think, a positive or negative effect on your career?
Yeah, I think David Gold once told me, to build the best team that I could.
Right.
When I was younger, I would occasionally take young lawyers and try to help them, possibly more than I should have done. There are times when people are just not cut out to be litigators in a really hard and fast moving environment. And I would often try and see the best in people and of course nurture them as well as I could. And I think David was probably telling me at the time, don't spend too much of your energy and time doing that, and build a team of really brilliant people and surround yourself with them. And that's what I've done at Celador. I mean, that is by far and away, the single most important thing that I've achieved here is build a team of really brilliant people, most of whom I've known, or certainly the partners at Celador, I've known in my past life, and really highly rated them, and been fortunate enough to persuade them to come and join. And that's been hugely rewarding, and it's holding the firm in good stead. So, some of the achievements that we've been able to get to are down to that high bar and high quality.
Excellent. So just moving on to looking at other people, and there's someone who's either directly or indirectly been responsible for recruiting a lot of laterals who presumably were successful before they joined, otherwise you would never recruited them. What are the kind of 2 or 3 reasons that you see that they either succeed or fail when they leave their previous firm and join you guys, whether it's here or anyway, obviously without being specific necessarily?
So I think, looking back, the most successful lateral partner that I can think of was somebody who left Herbert Smith and joined a US firm, and his practice area was very specific, and it was one that was growing at the time, and had a continuing relevance for a very long period of time. And I think he was a master of what he was doing. He knew it all inside out. He was one of those people that would become sort of indispensable. And I think that particular person mastered his brief and, was probably going to be successful anywhere. But I think because he went to a firm that, didn't have that capability and needed it, it was a match made in heaven. On the other side of the coin, I suppose, I think you see law firms who want more of what they've got,
Right.
and so end up creating a competitive environment where that's always going to end in tears, I would say. Some people think that, oh, well, we've got 5 partners in this department, so if we had 7 it would be better. And actually that isn't always the case. And I think some management firms that have a sort of a very concentrated management and a very broad range of partners, and the management within the body of partners is fairly on the light side. Those people with the sort of the so-called helicopter view often don't really understand what's going on, and they underestimate the people that they've got, don't realize actually they're doing an extremely good job and work well amongst themselves, and you're putting a sort of you put a fox in the chicken pen, which is not always a great idea.
That's very interesting you say that, because in the report that we sponsored on lateral integration in law firms, this phrase contested space came up quite a lot.
Oh yeah.
So there was a feeling from a lot of people who contributed to the report that, as you said, if you were joining a department with 6 or 7 partners who broadly did the same thing as you, that was a lot trickier to integrate than if you're, and you didn't name him, but if you're the kind of person that joins and you're the only one to do your area of specialization, or one of a couple. So it's interesting you've said that effectively.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's almost like you're admitting that you promoted the wrong people into the department. If you feel like you've got to add to the body of partners and you haven't got people coming through who are going to be promoted organically, I mean, it must be an incredibly depressing thing for senior associates to find partners being catapulted in from elsewhere into a department in which they hope to thrive. At the end of the day, you've got to sometimes accept that the market is the market. I mean, look at Slaughter and they are obviously the premier corporate firm in the UK, and yet they've got a really, really impressive heavyweight litigation department. But it's not littered with tens or hundreds of partners. It's a relatively small department. It always has been. But they're doing extremely well, and they don't see the need to to suddenly triple in size.
I agree.
At the end of the day, I mean, what are you trying to do? I mean, ultimately it's about building and maintaining a firm, and the people that the leaders of the firm need to be clear what it is that they're trying to create and maintain.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes there are opportunities that arise within existing practice areas where the existing partners just don't have the skill set. So that's the reason why laterals are brought in. But I certainly agree with you that sometimes firms are looking for those laterals to, in my previous recruitment career, we had examples where they were asking laterals to generate more billings than their existing partners were doing, which always struck me as very difficult for a lateral to do and unrealistic. And as you said, if their existing partners are not up to scratch, then bringing a lateral is only going to bring those existing partners up to scratch.
Well, in that sort of situation, I would argue that it's more than 50% about the platform of the firm. You cannot underestimate the importance of the brand that you've joined or that you're in. So that was definitely a hurdle that I faced at Latham. The fact that I was no longer a partner at Herbert Smith, but was a partner at Latham and Watkins, who didn't have, and arguably still don't have, a particularly significant reputation for commercial litigation as such in England, was definitely an obstacle.
Yes, and that again, that happens. You see that a lot from Magic Circle partners who leave and join firms and they struggle. So looking at the attributes for success, perhaps realizing when you're in one of those large firms that sometimes it's not just you, but it's the firm, it's the mothership, it's the name, the brand name, which is generating the work, and having to accept that when you move to another firm. That's Is that kind of realization that's quite key, I would have thought, when you move out of one of those firms?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can underestimate that, which I think I probably did in retrospect, being honest.
Okay.
I was interested in, the next topic or
That's fine,
because we've only scratched the surface as far as I'm concerned here.
So just focusing a little bit more on people who have moved, and again, you're not going to name them, I understand that, and you've cited someone who moved very successfully. Are there types of people that you've seen who have been successful in their previous firms and then haven't been able to replicate that success where they've moved to? And I'm not saying they've moved to somewhere that you've been, but you've just seen it in the market. And why does that happen, do you think?
I think because there's, I would imagine it's because there's a misalignment. So I think it's a whole combination of things. But I think misalignment is probably the most significant. And you've got a situation where the new firm has underestimated the ability of the individual to lever out of the old firm the client relationships. And so the individual, it turns out, is a sort of paradigm partner, been there for life, has grown up with the firm and picked up new clients and worked to build new clients with other partners across the practice areas of the firm, and thinks that actually, well, I'm an important component to this relationship, and so these clients will ultimately go with me when I move to my new firm, and turns out that that's quite tricky. The other thing that I would say is that garden leave is actually a really effective tool.
Okay.
You can blunt a partner's ability to transition work and clients quite effectively with garden leave. And again, the most successful laterals are the ones who have got who make a flying start.
Yeah.
So you resigned on day 365, and on day one you join, and you hopefully take as much of the work that you were doing with you, so that you can present a seamless process for the client, which they will appreciate, and get yourself off to a good start as a lateral in your new home.
Which is difficult to do, particularly when you're leaving a UK law firm.
Very much so.
It happens.
It is difficult to do, but as I say, there are times when it can be done. It depends which law firm you're leaving and their appetite for imposing these kind of covenants. I mean, but I think lawyers underestimate the importance of continuity and the clients themselves. So, I would argue that the clients come first, and if you happen to be leaving and you're in the middle of something, well, it's better for the client if you finish the job off and you reach an arrangement between the two law firms that can facilitate that, for the overall benefit of the client.
Okay. I mean, one final thing on this topic. I mean, in your world, a number of years now ago, there was a lot of barristers that moved to law firms. It doesn't seem to be so many now, but maybe I'm just not being aware of them. Do you think a lot of those moves, were they successful? If not, why not?
I can think of one that was extremely successful.
Right.
Peter Goldsmith's move to Debevoise. And I can think of another or few that were less successful, which I won't name. And I can't honestly explain, the reason why some were less successful than others. And certainly not going to spend this podcast talking about Peter Goldsmith. So we can probably move on. And I noticed it's 9 minutes to go before the beginning of the Ryder Cup as well. So we've got to get a.
Okay, that's thank you for mentioning. Looking ahead, then, what do you think the effect of AI will be on the future success of partners? And are there other factors that you can see coming over the horizon which may affect success in the future?
Tricky question. Can I call a friend? Or can I call,
or
can
50,
I,
50,
can I ask
50, 50.
ChatGPT?
Well, you can if you really want to. That's going to give you a better answer.
Yeah. Well, who knows? But I mean, look, I think it is a fascinating topic, and one that I have given a little bit of thought to, obviously. And I think the jury is still out to some extent. Of course, AI is going to make certain tasks much quicker and much cheaper. And in particular, I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that, document management processes are going to become easier. And we're using some AI functions to, basically, compartmentalize documents, work out where there is a thread common to a whole range of documents, and then the computer will track that, and you can retrieve it very quickly, and you can remember, or rather recall, with the help of AI, what arguments were used at a particular hearing, and what the reaction to those arguments was, how you framed them exactly, and how you might frame them differently, or rather the same, making sure that you're being consistent as well. Consistency, is also important in litigation. So there's a lot of scope for the use of AI, in those sorts of issues. And I think also, predictive technology is also really, really interesting, working out, what particular judges, do, how a case might be determined, what might be the crucial factors, and so forth. But I think there are a number of worries about AI, and one of them is the effect on junior lawyers. So what tasks are junior lawyers going to be doing, and how are they going to to evolve into senior lawyers? I think for senior lawyers it's less tricky, because obviously the key is all in the judgment, and the way in which you use the outcome of a computer driven process, and how you communicate it. Okay. So remember that what we do as lawyers, we are trusted advisors, and so we have to maintain the trust of our clients. So our clients want us to be efficient and cost effective, but they also want us to be brilliant at foretelling what's going to happen, and what they should do to achieve the outcome that they want. And they are clearly looking for human intelligence, emotional intelligence, and strong communication skills and psychological skills, as we mentioned before. So how young lawyers are going to acquire those skills in this slightly new world is going to be a challenge, and whether clients are going to be willing to to pay for younger lawyers to sit on phone calls that might otherwise be be one-to-one or such like. I don't know. I think the other element to it is, and again I use the word trust. We are in a very, very peculiar world at the moment, and a lot of technology and AI is being driven in the United States of America, and the government there is at the moment a very unpredictable one. And there is a real question over the future of democracy in the United States of America. There are lots of very, very powerful, wealthy people, and a lot of them are in the tech space, and a lot of them are going out of their way to please the US government in all sorts of different ways. And so ultimately, you've got to be able to trust the computer that you're, inputting stuff into. And there are massive issues over confidentiality, certainly in the litigation context, and whether things that you're doing are truly confidential, whether they can retain privilege. So in other words, people potentially having access to the way in which you can't research a case, and some of the answers that you might be getting, and so forth and so forth. But ultimately, computers need to be programmed, and there are people who own the companies that program those computers and produce the software and so on. And I don't currently feel as though we can entirely trust all of these things. I'm watching it with great interest, and of course, the firm is devising organically our sort of policies around this as we go forward.
Okay, very interesting. So one final question, which is, what's your one golden rule to be a successful partner?
Don't waste your time.
Okay.
So, don't do things that are just a waste of time. Don't, just focus on what you're doing, to the mandate or to your career.
Excellent. Okay. Well, look, thanks, Simon, for being our guest. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear your thoughts on what makes a successful partner. We're very grateful to you, so thank you again. So join us on our next episode of Beyond Billables, Lessons from Top Law Firm Partners, when we'll have another renowned partner who will share their secrets of success. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.